Hello friends and welcome to a new video. It's been some time since we last talked about Feral and Shadowlands and there have been a lot of changes. So I wanted to put another video out. I hoped that I would have better access by now, but unfortunately we didn't get an invite, so we'll have to deal without that. I just want to talk to you about the changes they did since we last looked at Feral and Shadowlands. Also a little bit about the covenants, what I think will be the covenants that we'll most likely pick, and why that is so. So to get right into it, I'll just pull the Druid class changes up right now. And one of the things we see at first glance is that they nerfed Sabertooth. Just as a reminder, I'll have to deactivate my Discord in a second. I don't want a booster right now. Okay. At the moment, Sabertooth increases your damage by Ferocious Bite, and also increases the duration of your rip that is active on the target that you're biting by 4 seconds per combo point spent. What that means is that you can extend a nice buffed up rip by Blood Talents and Tiger's Fury, that is, for forever with your Ferocious Bites. So you only have to apply it once, and then you can just bite all the way through the rest of the fight without having to worry about rip anymore. And I think that takes an important mechanic out of the Feral toolkit completely. And since it's just so overwhelmingly stronger than the other two choices here in single target fights, that is, you have no choice but picking this. And you're really hindering your playstyle, or the Feral kit, because you are just practically removing one ability out of the game completely after you've used it once. So they wanted to address that, and what they did is that they lowered the amount of time you get back on your rip. So you may be able to extend it for a while, but you can't do it indefinitely. So you have to reapply rip at some point in the game. The other thing is Feral is balance based. We are not talking about that. Another thing that I think is just really nice, not gameplay wise, but just cosmetic, is that you will now be able to choose your cat and bear forms at the barber shop. You can choose the fur color independently. You don't have to rely on the skin color you chose for your race. Also, the artifact appearances will be in there. Possibly the Firelands Fire Kitty, we don't know about that yet. Also, all the other forms that you're not using in combat will be changeable. And there will be glyphs that unlock specific things on the barber. That's really great, because at the moment, to get the artifact appearances, you have to actually transmog the artifact weapons, so that limits your choices in transmog by a lot, especially since some specific types of artifact weapon skin colors are tied to the color of your artifact weapon. Okay, just let me get this. I'll just mute this for a minute. Sorry about that. Okay, so you can transmog freely. That doesn't seem like much, but actually it's a huge quality of life improvement, especially since you can, for example, transmog the werebear form, the mage tower appearance for tanks in your feral spec, and you can, when you change your bear form, use that other spec. That other form, and I think that's really great, because you can show off what you've earned without it being tied to a specific spec. So that's nice. Okay, what did they do? Yeah, for example, we get as baseline abilities for all Druid specs Ferocious Bite. We already had that as Feral. Barkskin, we didn't have that one. I'll talk about that in a second. Cyclone, which is a PvP talent at the moment, but will be baseline once again. Stampeding Roar and Iron Fur. So for us as Ferals, the most notable things are Barkskin, which replaced Survival Instincts in earlier alpha build, which was really bad, because Survival Instincts is a better defensive cooldown than Barkskin is. So we basically lost defensive. They changed that, we now get it in addition to Survival Instincts. So we have one more defensive cooldown to use, which is really great, and we can definitely make some use out of that. Also, Cyclone will be back in PvE content. I don't think it will matter too much, but there may be some specific scenarios where you'd really like it. Because enemies that are in a Cyclone aren't targetable by other spells, or they immune that. So, for example, what you could do is at the first pull in Shrine of a Storm, where you have all the little mobs and the big one lieutenant mob, you could Cyclone that lieutenant mob when the others are about to die, and the big one doesn't get any bolstering stacks. So that would be a specific use case for that. That's something you can do with Mind Control at the moment, but you could also do it with a Cyclone in the future. And I think that's just a little bit of utility that doesn't hurt us too much, and it's really great to have that. Also, we will be able to choose other PvP talents and don't have to pick Cyclone because it's base 9. Just another plus for us. I really like that. Stampeding Roar for all druid specs is a little bit annoying, I might say, because it was utility that was unique to Shamans if they spec'd into it, and Ferals as well as Guardian Druids. Now you don't have a reason to bring a Guardian Druid or Feral Druid because every Druid can do it. The Wicked Iron Fur is pretty much ignorable for PvE content, but hey, you might be able to step in when your tank dies to taunt a pole and savage it by some amount, which is fine. Yeah, Iron Fur. Especially with Heart of the Wild as a new talent that buffs us when we are using shapeshift forms that are not meant for our spec. So for example, if you're playing a Feral Druid and you're activating Heart of the Wild when going into Bear, you'll have more defensive stats in the Bear form, get double Iron Fur stacks, stuff like that. While when you use your heals will be stronger and stuff like that. So you can perform your off-roll skill sets better when you're using Heart of the Wild. Okay, we already talked about Barkskin. Ferocious Bite is available to all specs. That's all the stuff we already talked about. Not too many important things here. Let's just scroll through this. Okay, what is most important about the changes here is that the CC abilities like Mighty Bash or Typhoon are now tied to the different affinities. That's what they're called. I'm not sure about Mighty Bash, I might be wrong on that one. But for example, Maim is tied to picking Feral affinity. When you're playing Feral Druid, you already have it. But if you're playing another spec, for example a tank spec, you have the other 3 specs here in this level 45 talent row to pick from. And now, as you can see, for example, for Guardian affinity, I will learn Iron Fur and Frenzied Region. Now, in addition to that, I get another ability. So, for example, here at Balance, I now get Moonlit Form, Star Search, Lunar Strike, Solar Wrath, and Sunfire. But I would also get Typhoon in Shadowlands. That's an additional CC ability that I get from just picking Balance affinity. Same with Restoration affinity. I would get Oswald's Vortex there, I think. I'm not really sure how they're bound right now. I'd have to check that out. But those different CC abilities are not skillable anymore, and instead you get them tied to the affinities. That's all I wanted to say about that. Okay, let's look at Feral. Okay, Mighty Bash is still a talent choice, so it's not tied to the tank affinity. And instead we get Heart of the Wild in that row, replacing Typhoon, because Typhoon is now tied to the Moonkin affinity. Okay, the other thing that changed for Feral is Blood Talents. Let us talk about that. right at the moment, you get buff with 2 stacks after using a regrowth or entangling roots, and those stacks buff your next rip, rake, shred, whatever you're using. It doesn't matter what ability you're using. It gets a damage buff for the full duration. So, for example, if you apply a damage over time effect, it ticks for the improved damage for the entire duration. So what you're doing at the moment is to always have a buffed rip and a buffed rake active with your blood talents, and if both of those don't need a refresher, you're using it for ferocious bites and a shred, for example. A lot of people complain about that because they don't like the playstyle where you have to use your instant heals or your instant roots to get a damage buff. And Blizzard listened to that and reworked blood talents. Now it activates not on a heal or on a root, but it activates on you using shred, rake, and fresh within 5 seconds of another. So you have to use them pretty much all after another. You may be able to fit another spell in there, but I'm not sure about that. They recently buffed that time window because before it was 3 seconds and you didn't have the ability to use any other skills inside that time window. Now it may be possible. But when you do that, your next 2 rips or ferocious bites damages are increased. So what does it mean? First of all, you don't have to care about empowered rakes anymore. At least not blood talents empowered rakes. There will still be Tiger's Fury buffing your rakes, but you don't have much agency in controlling the uptime of that. There's some min-maxing to do, but it's not nearly as much as you have to do with the blood talents at the moment. So that will be a lot easier. You are buffing now rips and ferocious bites, and as far as I know, also the primal wraths. When you apply a rip with primal wrath to all the targets in your vicinity, you buff the rips on all of them with blood talents. So that's pretty nice. I was afraid they wouldn't do that, but yeah, it's implemented, so that will be a pretty nice addition to that. So what you're doing now is you will try to proc blood talents before your rip runs out. You're applying a buffed rip, and then you don't have to worry about what skill you're using next, because blood talents only procs on bites and rips, so you can just continue with your normal rotation. And when you're back at 5 combo points, you're using a ferocious bite now, which is still buffed by blood talents. So the usability of a talent is a lot easier, but it also takes away a lot of the skill element that is inherent in Feral right now. This will raise the floor for Feral damage by a lot. I'm pretty sure about that, because just the spec gets a lot easier. But in addition to that, our ceiling gets lowered, in my opinion. Now, a really good Feral could do really nice damage with blood talents, and had to really think about it. Of course, after some time, you were pretty good at it without thinking too much about it. But there was a distinct way to separate good ferals from bad ferals. They're taking that away from the spec with this blood talents rework, and I think that's a real shame, because that is a lot of fun I get from playing my druid. Just being able to really show off what I'm able to do, and that will not be possible as much anymore. And yeah, I'm really not excited about that. Another thing they did to compromise the Sabertooth nerf and the blood talents rework is just raising the base DPS of all our abilities, basically. So that it will be also possible to maybe pick other talents than our pretty much set in stone setup that we are running right now. Since I don't have the ability to test it in the beta at the moment, I can't say if they will achieve that by doing that. But I would be looking forward to something like playing Savage Roar again, just to have another skill element there, because they took blood talents basically away from us. Or maybe play an Incarn build, which is, to be honest, pretty easy, but it's also a lot of fun just dealing insane amounts of damage in that incarnation window. We'll see how that goes. I'm looking forward to testing it out, but at the moment I'm not really hyped about the spec. So that's basically all the feral changes. There are some PvP changes that we are not talking about right now. But the other thing that is really important to talk about is covenants. You see, covenants are highly discussed at the moment, which I can totally understand, because as far as looks right now, Blizzard will make it really hard to switch covenants once you've chosen one finally. You might say, hey, that's fine, your choices have to matter, and that's basically the argument that Blizzard is giving us at the moment. But as someone who wants to compete at a real high level, it just feels so bad. For example, there are covenants like the Kyrian, where I really like the aesthetics of it, the story of it. I think it's a really pretty faction. I really like the atmosphere there, but their abilities are just so bad for us that there will be no way for me to pick Kyrian. And that doesn't make my choice matter in a good sense, because there isn't really a choice to make. I will have to pick what is best for the content I want to play. And that isn't even so easy, because there will be things that are way better for Raid, while there are others that are way better for Mythic Plus, and I like to play both. So what am I supposed to do? My plan at the moment is to pick the best raiding covenant while we're still progressing in the raid. And as soon as we killed the last boss, as soon as we got our cutting edge, I'll swap back to the Mythic Plus covenant and play a lot of Mythic Plus and suck in a raid. And while I'm playing the Raid Covenant, I'll be really hindered in Mythic Plus, and it just feels awful. But there are a lot of videos talking about that. I don't want to talk about that anymore. So let's just look at the abilities and see what we think. So Kyrian, we are getting kindred spirits. You're basically putting up a bond with one other player in your group, and you get a positive effect depending on if the player is a tank, a healer, or a DPS, and they are getting a buff as well. So yeah, that's a pretty boring ability to use in my opinion. It's just a buff that you're putting up. But hey, number-wise, I bet it's fine. The other thing that is important besides the class ability is the Covenant ability. And I would say the Covenant ability of the Kyrian is one of the worst there is right now, if not the worst. So what it does is you have this little steward guy that you can summon, and he brings you a Vial of Serenity. And that's basically a heal potion that removes all curses, all diseases, all poisons, and all bleed effects on you. And I mean, that's nice, I guess. There are some situations where you would really like that. For example, in King's Rest, if you are stacking up the bleeds from the berserkers, you could just use that potion and get rid of them. And yeah, that's nice, but there are other abilities that are just so much better, and you have much more use cases where you would like those abilities. So you basically would never pick this. I don't think there's a single class where the class ability is so good that you ignore the bad Covenant signature ability, but I may be wrong about that. For druids, this is definitely a no-go. The other faction I want to look at is Venthyr. Venthyr have as a signature ability Door of Shadows. You can basically select a location in a 35-yard range, put up a cast for 1.5 seconds on a 1-minute cooldown, keep that in mind, and you disappear on your position and appear on the selected location. So you can do some really fancy Mythic Plus skips, for example. That's the first thing that comes to mind for me. Or if you remember Unad from the raid tier before, what is it called? Before ny'alotha. Crucible of Storms, I think. At least that right here. Warlocks were really strong in that fight because they had a lot of self-healing and also could use their teleports to skip the lasers. That's something you could do with Door of Shadows as well. So I think this signature ability is really strong, and the class ability isn't bad. So Ravenous Frenzy allows us for 20 seconds, as long as we're using druid abilities, we are increasing our damage, healing, and our haste for every cast by 2%. And the downside of that is if you are spending 1.5 seconds idle, the frenzy overcomes you and you're losing health per stack and you're getting a stun. This is a 3-minute cooldown, so we could line it up with our Berserk, for example, and you can just keep pushing the buttons and you're stacking up above. And I think that feels really great from what I've seen. It looks like a lot of fun. And number-wise, it's pretty strong as well, in my opinion. So here you have a really nice combination of Covenant signature ability that has some use cases, and the Ravenous Frenzy that is just a fun button and a strong button to press. So the next faction we're looking at is Necrolords. Necrolords have as a Covenant ability Fleshcraft. It's basically a shield that you put onto yourself after a 4-second channel, and when there are corpses nearby you get a stronger shield basically. So one thing about that is that you might think you could pre-channel that and live some important abilities in some fights that you would not otherwise survive. For example, the first boss in Freehold, or the first boss in King's Rest, or stuff like that. And yeah, that's right, you might survive that, but also you have to channel for 4 seconds. Don't underestimate that. That's a really long time. So it's not really fun to channel that shield. And yeah, you might survive that one ability, but I don't think there are too many situations where you would like to pick this, especially if not your entire group has it, because then you can't survive a wide damage tick, for example, if only 4 people are using this ability and the rest of the people are dying. So you can't really plan with this. But let's look at the class ability. That's Adaptive Swarm. You command a swarm that heals or deals damage over 12 seconds and increases your periodic effects. That means our regrowth hot ticks, our rake damage, our fresh damage, our rip damage, our rejuve if we've taken the restoration affinity. And when it runs out, it jumps to another target, and it always jumps between friends and enemies. So this is it's an okayish effect, I'd say. It deals damage or heals. We as DPS only care about the damage, to be honest. And it's a press and forget type of thing. You might want to focus the enemy that you are using the swarm on, because your DPS effects are improved. But if you're in a fight with 1 to 3 targets, you would put up bleeds on every target anyways, and if it's bigger, your single target rake is definitely to put on that enemy, but besides from that, it doesn't have too many gameplay interactions. So yeah, it's just meh. It's definitely better than Kyrian, but it's not great either. Okay, the last Covenant we have to look at, Night Fae. Night Fae has as a Covenant ability for all classes Soul Shape. You turn into a Vulpin, that's a spectral fox basically, and you get increased movement speed. You can also use that ability again to teleport 10 yards forward. You can unlock different styles for that, and while you're in a rest area, it has an infinite duration. Otherwise, it has a 12-second duration on a 1.5 minute cooldown. So you get mobility, which is really, really great in both Mythic Plus and raids. So remember when I talked about Door of Shadows to be able to skip things like blazes on Unat? You could do that with the Night Fae Covenant signature ability as well, because you have this little 10-yard teleport. Also, it looks pretty good. So the class ability now is one that is highly discussed. It is Convoke the Spirits. You are using that on a 2-minute cooldown. It is a 4-second channel. And what you're doing in that time is using 16 different druid abilities. So those abilities depend on what shapeshift form you're in. So if you're in caster form, you will cast Star Surge, Starfall, Moonfire, Wrath, Regrowth, Rejuve und Rake. Okay. Sorry, I was wrong. They changed it again, I guess. So if you're playing Balance, you will cast Star 4, Star Search, Moonfire, Wrath, Regrowth, Rejuve, Rake, and Fresh, depending on what form you're in. So if you're, for example, in caster form, you won't be casting Rake or Fresh. But if you're in cat form, you would cast those, or in bear form, you would use Fresh. And if you're in any other specs, you won't cast Star Search or Star 4, because I guess that's broken. You're only casting Wild Growth, Swiftment, Moonfire, Wrath, Regrowth, Rejuve, Rake, and Fresh. Another thing that is important here, besides it favoring your shapeshift form that you're in, it also doesn't reapply dots to enemies that already have it on them. So if you have Fresh on the enemies, it will probably not use Fresh immediately again, but instead will try to Rake a lot of them. Or it will cast a Wild Growth to buff all your party, and then will probably apply regrowths to people. But not always to the same person, but to different people, because the others already have a regrowth buff. So it is intelligent. It wasn't that when it first got released, and it looked pretty awful. But right now, I think it's the most fun ability of all of them. Because, I mean, just look at that druid, just completely insane, rotating around, casting all the different abilities. It looks like a lot of fun. Also, the Covenant signature ability looks really great. And I think, besides some elaborate skips in Mythic Plus, it has all the same capacity as Door of Shadows. So for me, I think I would pick Night Fae at the current state of the game, because this just looks like so much fun. And appropriate to use in all different kinds of contents. I could see myself using that in PvP, in PvE, both Raid and Mythic Plus, in the open world. So I think I wouldn't ever get tired of this. So this is definitely my choice to go right now. Nothing is final. It all depends on conduits and soul binds and stuff like that, and we haven't seen too much of it yet, so I can't really say what we're going into right now. But as it looks right now, I will definitely pick Night Fae over the others if I'm playing Druid in general, because that isn't even sure yet, because the changes they did to the Pharaoh spec itself I don't really like. But hey, we'll see where it goes. Thank you guys for watching. This was a little bit longer than I anticipated. I hope you found it entertaining and really informative. Please leave any comments regarding your questions or just some feedback. I would really like to read those. And thank you for watching. See you next time.